Welcome to Bay Area Vista. I'm Janice Edwards, and I have to say I think this is the most unusual location we've ever chosen for a show. We are on location at the Fouché Hudson Funeral Home in Oakland, and the reason we're here is because we're talking about Homegoings, an award-winning documentary by ChristineTurner, who's with us. Welcome, Christine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a look at one clip now from Homegoings, and then we're going to start our discussion about your work.
In this life, it can get so rough that you want to go someplace to get some rest. When it comes to death and funerals, African American people, we have our own way. It has worked for us throughout the ages. It has kept us balanced, sane, and everybody know that it's going to be a sad, good time.
I know my brothers and my sisters, we are sad on today. Yeah. But I'm not going to let you be sad while I'm standing. Come on. Right. Because we're here for a celebration. Yeah. Not a celebration of death, but a celebration of a new life.
This is an incredible story that focuses on one particular man who is a funeral director in Harlem. How did you choose him, and why did you decide that this was the topic that you wanted to spend 4 years of your life exploring?
Well, I'll start by saying I didn't know it would take 4 years to finish the film, but I was really drawn to Isaiah Owens, who is the subject of the documentary, and his passion for his work. I saw a lot of meticulousness and dedication to what he does, and that he loves his job. And I think that some of the most interesting portraits and stories are people who are really passionate about their work. But I thought, what must it be like for someone to do this kind of work, and what is it that motivates him? And I was also interested in the larger African-American funerary tradition and where that came from, and its historical significance. So I felt that through his own personal story, there was a way of adjusting that at the same time.
Well, clearly it struck a chord for so many, and the way that you and I met was, of course, at the Martin Luther King Jr. Foundation celebration, because your film is featured there. You've received so many awards that speak to the fact that you've touched hearts. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's incredibly meaningful. I think as a documentary filmmaker, you hope that your work is seen, and that in some ways perhaps it might raise a certain amount of awareness or in some way contribute to this sort of larger conversation. And one of the things I hope with this film is that people will start talking about sort of this very taboo topic of death and end-of-life issues, and but also be able to look back at this tradition and understand its beginnings and its significance for African Americans and African American history.
I came to New York when I was 17 years old, the day that Robert Kennedy's body was being taken to Washington, D.C. for burial. I was on the bus coming to New York.
I can see why you chose Mr. Owens, because he's quite a character, and he just really has such a genuine love for people, and that's one of the things that comes through. Certainly at the time, and I've been through this, as many of us have, when you've lost a loved one, you need someone who's compassionate and reassuring, and the fact that he's so dedicated to making sure that people look their best for this last time is something that so many people value. You'll hear older people say, "Oh yeah, she looked good," and it seems like a strange compliment, but it really means a lot to people.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the rituals or traditions, not just for African American funerals, but for others as well, is the open casket funeral. And as one of the people that I interviewed in the film, he talks about the importance of that last moment to sort of look and touch and feel, or even say goodbye to that person. And so, the funeral itself is an an important celebration for people, and so they of course want to look their best, and many people see it as a transition and their final send-off. And so one of the unique things I think about Mr. Owens is that he, as you mentioned, he's great with people, and he understands how to help people in that difficult time. And also he has quite a following for his cosmetology or beautician skills. So it's sort of both of those things that he brings together, and people, they keep coming back to.
Who they're going to trust to take care of that person. And when people give you that kind of trust, I feel like I'm obligated to really, really take care of them.
You're a Bay Area native living in New York now. What did it mean for you to have homegoings featured there?
It was incredibly meaningful for a variety of reasons. One is that I'm a native San Franciscan, and so of course being able to show your own work in your hometown at such an esteemed venue is really special in front of your family and people that you grew up with, but also the fact that it was part of the Martin Luther King celebration was a tremendous honor. And actually one of the things that I learned while I was doing research for the film is that funeral directors actually had a pretty significant role during the civil rights movement, and their funeral homes often served as safe meeting places and gatherings for people to congregate, and hearses served as covert transportation means, and so it was being able to have it at the MLK celebration is really special.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes sense because there was so much pressure at the time, and so many spies trying to infiltrate to find out what was going on with the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting is since the role of the funeral director, the funeral industry is one of the first. There are fewer barriers to entry for African Americans, and so as a result, the funeral directors within the community have often been regarded in a way that doctors or lawyers or other sort of professionals have been regarded, but they were economically stable, and so they were very much pillars in the community, and people came to them not just for funeral services, but just as people in the community that they could seek out advice from or use their telephone, as Mr. Owens relays in his film, and all kinds of other reasons.
Yes, and when you talk about them relying on the funeral directors, we think about this time of transition, as we've discussed, is so important. What have you thought about differently in terms of death or life because of spending so much time in the funeral homes, seeing what this director does and seeing the families who come at the time of loss and grief?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I think the single biggest thing that I came away with while making the film is just being reminded of the preciousness of life, and that at any moment things can end, and remembering to sort of treasure that time that you have with your friends and family. At the same time, one of the most difficult thing was observing and watching these families go through this very difficult and emotional time, and I'm incredibly thankful for their generosity in terms of sharing their stories. I think we have a lot that we can learn from them, and so hopefully that's something that audiences will connect with as well.
Yes, well, they certainly have. You have been sponsored by PBS POV, and there are lessons, there have been discussions, so it really is an opportunity for people to take a moment, enjoy the work, and then think about the importance of life and what they take away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so taboo for us to talk about oftentimes. So these are difficult kinds of conversations, end-of-life care, what kind of, decisions that have to be made at end-of-life. We don't often talk about them, and hopefully this film in some ways can serve as just an opening, a way to sort of spark that conversation. It wasn't the reason that I decided to make the film. I love storytelling, and I'm looking for very human stories, but it's been wonderful to see that it's had that it's being used in community settings and by colleges and universities, and in more ways than I could have ever imagined, and that's also very special, I think.
And one of the people featured in there is a woman who says, well, I don't want to die soon, but I want to look good when I go, but she's really committed to making sure that things are all set so that there's no family squabbling and all of that becomes so difficult at the time of loss.
Absolutely, yeah, the woman is Linda Williams Miller, but they call her Red.
The more you go on as life, you see that you have to say, let's prepare for this. It's going to happen eventually.
Now, let's get this hair color done. Just in case you don't get a chance to get your hair done before the time comes. What is the color of this rinse you got?
Red on red.
Red on red? By who?
Can I call you and give you back that information?
Call me and give me your hair color. Because you know how particular you are. Red on red.
To have you red.
Yeah. And you saw that top I showed you
And that's a
last
rinse
night?
or a dye?
Dye.
Yeah.
Because he know I want red.
Yeah.
He know I want a red outfit. And I was showing her this top last night.
And how much embalming fluid can we get in the booth?
Because they ain't standing up that high there. Because we got to pump up that up.
The Botox booth.
I want them up. I'm talking to you.
All right.
And said, ooh, she looks beautiful. Oh, her boobs are nice.
As I said, I grew up in the Bay Area. I'm sure that you didn't think you'd be doing something about homegoings as part of your career at that time. But what did you think? Where did you go to high school, and what did you think you were going to do after that?
Sure. I attended San Francisco public schools. I went to Lowell High School. And, it's interesting. I always was sort of our family photographer, even from like the, I don't know, probably since I was like 8 or 9. For some reason, I could take pictures. And so I just constantly was the family documentarian. And I think I was fortunate in that I was able to participate in different programs through, I remember my middle school had an elective course one year. It was the first time they were ever doing it. They offered video courses, and I just really loved it. And I think that, it's wonderful learning about all these different things. I mean, I never thought that I would spend 4 years becoming a funeral business.
Or then coming in and doing a talk show in another parlor after all that. Right?
But no, it's been interesting, and I'm incredibly grateful. And it's been a way to sort of bring together my interest in social issues and history, and also sort of the creative aspect of filmmaking.
Right. You had done some short films before.
Yes.
That were also acclaimed. So it must be very rewarding now to see not only the community impact, but to feel that accomplishment. Because when you love something and you're passionate about it, and then you see that work begins to live in the world, there are few feelings better than that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's been incredibly rewarding, and I hope that I will continue to make films.
Thank you for calling, and welcome to the Isaiah Owens Funeral Home, conveniently located in the center of Harlem. Our hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Isaiah Owens Funeral Service, where beauty softens your grief.
I've been in the funeral business now for 42 years. Here at the funeral home, I work with my wife, Lily. My daughter, I call her Dee Dee, but her name is Shaniqua Princess. And my son, Isaiah Christopher.
It's free. Just when you come in with your names, whoever's here, just ask for them, and they'll give you one.
It's called liquid tissue. Probably a first cousin to Botox that you get when you're living, except you get this after you pass away. And what I'm doing now is, this lady is 98 years old. I'm trying to make her look like this. I need some crazy glue. In the 80s, you had, if it was 10 people downstairs that had died, there were probably 4 homicides, 4 people or 5 people with AIDS, Now, most of the people that come are people that die from natural causes. Heart problems, cancer, hypertension, especially in our community. We have a lot of death from strokes. I've been called to do this work by a higher power. So at the end of my life, I might have failed in a lot of things when I have to stand before God, but I can check off one thing, and that's well done for the bodies. Because every body that he gave me, I gave it back to him. Splendid and good, and I never slighted anybody. So the work that he put here for me to do, I did 100%. Other things I probably came real short.
Did he say anything about how he copes emotionally with that? Because dealing with that level of emotion on a daily basis must be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially it was something that he had to figure out how to deal with. He's a person of incredible faith, and but also I think he's come to the thinking that this is life is a journey, and death is part of that journey, and there is a certain inevitability to death, and a real understanding that this is just part of life. And I think he reminds himself of that all the time, and it allows him to carry on. But I think really it comes back to him really feeling passionate about the work, and being able to contribute in the way that he does, that really sustains him.
At 5 years old, I dug a hole, buried a matchstick, put the dirt over it, put some flowers over it. So actually that was my first funeral. These are the men. This is a lady. This is the hearse. The family's coming to the church. That's when the bell rings. Bang! When I was growing up, I buried frogs. I buried chickens. I buried the mule that died. I buried the neighbor's dog, and the dog's name was Snowball. One day they found Snowball under the house, dead. So they came and got me, so I buried Snowball.
Cats, chickens, anything that he find dead, he bury, have a funeral.
Except a snake. Snakes just got thrown into the woods or whatever. This is a pregnant lady. This is an old man. They thought I was a mental case.
I don't know where he got it from. Can't even think where he got it from. He was a mess, but that was his calling.
One of the things that's great is to see Mr. Owens and his mother, too, because when you talk about traditions, there's just such a richness from people of a certain generation. What did you learn in particular from her, and how was it working with her and him?
It was fantastic. She is an incredible woman. She's, I believe, 96 years old. She was 95 at the time of filming. And she just has this incredible sense of humor and sort of way about life. She grew up in the rural South, and I think went to school up until about 7th grade, and then years later in her 70s actually went back to school after she finished raising her children. Which is pretty amazing. She was so happy that actually somebody was interested in just hearing her story and hearing her son's story. I think she herself found it a little odd, more than a little odd, that when she learned that her son was doing mock funerals as a child, and so I think there was a feeling of something is wrong here.
Right.
But many years later, to see that he took that passion and turned it into a successful business and really understand that, you know, that he describes it as a calling, and I think she certainly sees it that way. It's really sort of come full circle, and I think she's very proud of him.
Speaking of journeys, going from San Francisco to New York and being a filmmaker there, that's the dream of so many people. How does that compare to what you thought it would be in the actuality of living it?
You know, I didn't necessarily know exactly what to expect. I think I love New York and I love the Bay Area. I know that my family would like to have me back here. I come from like 3 generations of San Francisco East Bay people.
And don't the winters make you think about coming back to San Francisco?
The winters, definitely. They're having a huge storm right now where I don't think anyone's allowed to leave their apartments. And, you know, there is a vibrant community here as well. But I think for now, I'll probably be out there for a little while, and we'll see. Maybe I'll come back.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of funding and support for the arts, do you find that it's easier to connect with people for work than in San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several organizations in New York, including, you know, POV, that are important to a number of filmmakers, but there's also a great organization here, ITVS, who I will mention also funded part of the film, the independent television service that's based here in San Francisco, and I'm incredibly grateful that actually they came on board for this film as well. But yeah, I find that in part probably because I studied in New York and that I've been there for a while, most of my connections are really there at this point.
Makes sense in that way. Let's talk about Bay Area favorite places. I know you said your family's here. Where's your favorite place to go to eat?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, I grew up in Borough Heights, which is not far from the Mission, so one of the things that I miss the most is actually just going and getting some tacos on 24th and Mission. I love that. But of course, you know, the produce and the food here is amazing, and there's some great restaurants in New York, and New York is incredibly diverse, but I think the access to all the farms here is what makes the dining really exciting. So I'm half Chinese, half African American. I love the Chinese food here, and the dim sum and greens. I love the produce is exceptional.
It truly is. And there's wonderful music in your film. What about music? Places you love to go here?
Oh, wow. Well, I haven't, as of recent, been out and about too much, but I did go with my parents on a visit recently to Yoshi's downtown, and so it was fun. We saw some Maceo Park and some of the pumpkin jazz stuff.
How fun, yeah, the film work, right?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Growing up Chinese and African American in the Bay Area, did you ever feel tugged between the cultures, or did you feel accepted by both?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I was really fortunate in that, you know, at the schools that I attended, there tended to be a lot of mixed race students, and they weren't necessarily the same combination as I was, but my parents always instilled in me from a very young age, you know, be proud of who you are. And so, yeah, I seem to have, I don't know, more so than I think in New York, I seem to have a number of friends that were all, you know, mixed up.
Yeah, and the Bay Area is really accepting in so many ways, fortunately.
Yeah.
When you think about people seeing homegoings, we talked about the reflection on the importance of life, but what else, especially for young people, what would you want them to take away from it?
Yeah, I think that I'm hoping just that, you know, for a lot of people, they haven't thought about sort of the practicalities of what might happen when they lose a parent. And so a lot of people have said to me, wow, I hadn't thought about everything that has to happen. And I think just the more sort of mentally we can sort of be prepared for that, I think the better in some ways, and just recognizing that we do have, you know, a very limited amount of time here. So certainly that's something I hope. And then I hope that people are also, you know, learn a little bit about where the tradition comes from, and sort of, you know, the idea that these rituals and traditions exist for a reason, and that they allow us to, you know, cope and move forward with our lives at the same time.
Yeah, that's very important. My mother's best friend died 6 months before my mom did, and my friend that I've known since we were 4 had this whole pre-need list post-need list with everything. And even though my mom had been ill and I was prepared, I wasn't in certain ways. And even though she had already made arrangements years before for certain things, which made it easier, there are always those shocking moments. And I think that that's an important lesson that you're sharing, to be as prepared as possible, especially if a loved one is ill. We don't want to think about it, and of course we always pray for miracles, and we don't want that step to happen. But the more steps that you can take beforehand, the easier it will be to deal with the grief and all the unexpected reactions that you have when you realize that that person really is gone. And that's
absolutely,
that's fine.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I just thank you so much for bringing this work. It's just very rich and textured, and your sensitivity comes through, the personality of Mr. Owens comes through, and then his mom, of course, in her 90s is just
fantastic.
Comic relief as you
Yes.
for it as well. So if you'd like to know more about homegoings, we have details on our screen. And that's our show. I'm Janice Edwards. Thanks for all that you do to make our Bay Area the great place that it is. Please join us again next time. You never know where you'll find us. We look forward to seeing you then.
And to my surprise, my cousin Kathleen was on that bus. She was, and no mistake about it, was a glamour girl. She would be on the front page of every model magazine because she just had that look about her. She was a fly girl. And I knew somewhere along the line, I'm going to see the real Kathleen.